So monkeypox is big in the news right now. I know very little about it, not going to talk about it. What I would like to talk about though is just old diseases. Just because monkeypox, there are several different types of poxes out there. There's monkeypox, there's chickenpox, there's smallpox. And so I just got a little curious about this. I play role-playing games. Again, obvious because I'm painting role-playing game figures. And most of those are set, in a medieval type setting. And the thing is, they've all got, a lot of them have their diseases, but they don't have our common diseases. They've got our, made up filth fever and mummy rot and just things that would fit in a fantasy world, but not realistic in our terms. They don't have poxes and palsies and dropsies and all that other stuff. Another thing about role-playing games is people don't really want to role-play them. It's, you meet a man, he has a disease. I do a knowledge check, roll dice. Okay, he has filth fever, and this is how you cure it. And it's a little boring when you do it that way. So, like I said, I want to talk about some old-time diseases. Sort of the idea I have in mind here is the game master can read the description of the disease that the character actually has, then based on its symptoms can just make up a term for it. Because what we call chicken pox, someone else might call the drooling scabs or something weird like that, or so got to look at some of these old-time disease names just so that a game master would be able to make up a name for a in-game disease. And instead of just rolling a die for things, people can they can role play it out, and in the end they're going to take a knowledge check to find out if they figure out what's going on. But instead of just rolling the dice and saying knowledge check and then getting the answer, they can actually play things out. So, like I said, we were talking about poxes first. And a pox is basically anything that leaves a rash or a group of scabs or sores. So chicken pox, smallpox, scurvy pox. Scurvy is a disease, a lack of nutrition. Vitamin C helps you heal. If you have a deficiency of vitamin C, then you don't heal as well. Day-to-day use, we're hurting ourselves all the time. We are, just little flexing our muscles and all that. We're causing small breaks in the skin and all that. But if you have enough vitamin C, it heals almost, not instantly, but quick enough that it doesn't really show. Whereas if you don't get vitamin C, then these sores just start to appear out of nowhere, seemingly, because it's just, these small things aren't healing and they just get bigger and bigger over time. And so that's what scurvy is. And so a old German term for it, where no one's really sure where the term scurvy came from, but according to one theory, there was a German term for it, something to the effect of Scurfbox, which got translated or anglicized into scurvy pox. So scurvy is a pox. It causes a seeming rash to appear. Now, the Bible mentions the botch, the itch, and the scab as a curse that, if you disobey, don't follow God's commandment, or break the covenant with God, then you will suffer the itch, the botch, and the scab. And these are themselves basically, they're both symptoms, and in some cases they are diseases themselves. So the botch was sort of the botch of Egypt was considered to be boils. So it would be fair for a game master to call a disease a botch, and it's just so A botch would be similar to a pox, except instead of a rash or a bunch of small sores, it would be boils covering the person. Um, and again, the Bible refers to the botch, but don't let articles get you down. Or so Shakespeare, a pox on both your houses. Shakespeare's time, they recognized that there was more than one pox. If there was an epidemic or an outbreak of a pox, then it would be suddenly the pox. They wouldn't necessarily talk about the specific kind of pox, but people would suddenly be talking about the pox. So when the Bible talks about the botch, it was talking about one of the plagues of Egypt was boils, so it was probably referring to that. But a reader could be just as well, to consider that maybe there were other diseases that were called botches. So we have the Egyptian botch, and then we might have the Sumerian botch, and we might have this botch and that botch. So again, your role-playing gamer can look at it, and so he can just start talking about, you've got the bog botch, and you get it when you go into the bogs. And what it really is, it's just some other disease which the game system has named, and boils are one of the symptoms. And so the locals refer to it as the bog botch because that's their thought on it. And again, it's up to the players to role play this out a little bit, and then do a knowledge check and find out, this is really such and such disease. Like I said, a good game master will role play it out, and then a bad role player will turn around and say, knowledge check, and roll a die. No, have some fun with it. Let the game master role play out yourself some. Then do your knowledge check afterwards, and allow everyone to have a chance to participate. So that was botches. I had a list of things. So one thing, bubonic plague. It was basically called bubonic plague because buboes would appear, and those are basically little pus-filled sores, which someone might mistake for a boil. So bubonic plague could be looked at as a botch, even though technically it wasn't. Interesting thing about bubonic plague, it was believed to be spread by a miasma. What is a miasma? That's a Greek term, or it comes from the Greek for bad air, and there was the belief that if you breathed foul air, you could get diseases from it. And we do have airborne diseases, so it's not 100% off, but at the same time, they were misdiagnosing things based on their belief that it was caused by bad air sometimes. In the 18th and 19th century, there was the vapors, which we hear about sometimes. This was a woman's disease mostly because it was specifically believed to come from gases forming in the uterus. So it was considered a woman's disease. It was fainting spells, lightheadedness, hysteria, emotional mood swings, various things. Not really your medieval disease, can't really fit into a role-playing game as well, but it was a recognition that there were stuff, it was supposedly caused by vapors, and the idea of airborne diseases. So it was a extension of miasma theory, basically. So while someone in a game wouldn't necessarily get the vapors, it would be fair to have a character think, oh, he was exposed to bad vapors, and have this mistaken idea that the disease is spread through vapors of some sort. So referring to a disease as the vapors in a game, it wouldn't be the same as our modern day vapors, or our, not modern day, but 1800s, 1900s vapors. but it would be reasonable that characters in the game would think of airborne diseases, or the possibility of a vaporous disease. And so they might speak of such a thing. And of course, like I said, miasma theory existed. So it's very, before you even do that, a good old English name for a bad smell is a pum. Well, there's this pum just hung in the air. So, fit that in. They left the bodies unburied for 3 days, and a pum hung over the air, and someone went in and breathed the foul vapors as they buried these bodies, and they came down with the corpse dropsy, because if you don't bury a body soon enough, then it gives off these foul vapors, and you get the corpse dropsy when you breathe them in. And it's, again, completely, BS when it comes to the rules of the game, but it's good role play, and it gives the player something to work with, and it can be fun. And it's more than just a boring rolling dice and saying you're doing something. So, I just mentioned the dropsy. Dropsy is basically a swelling. Usually it's linked to an edema, or basically water retention. There were different types of dropsies depending on where it took place. So if you got it in your legs, it might be one dropsy. If you got it in your shoulder, it might be considered a different types of dropsy. So yeah, you can just make up names for different types of dropsies if you want. Based on the location, or based on the source, or the believed source of it, or so that's what a dropsy is. A palsy is basically a nerve disorder. It comes in one of two ways, either paralysis or uncontrolled movement, so trembling or tremors. And so there were actually different types of palsies listed. Today we have cerebral palsy, still exists. It's recognized as a problem with the brain, which causes partial paralysis or partial lack of control. Parkinson's disease, a few hundred years ago, people might have called it a palsy because people trembled and they lost control. Beriberi is a deficiency of some of the B vitamins, which causes people to have trouble moving. It's affects the nerves, and so beriberi would have been considered a palsy had it been known about in the world where they spoke of palsies. You might hear, someone has a stroke, part of their face can be paralyzed afterwards. And if you read old books or old stories, you might come across palsy-faced, someone being described as, and that would be having part of their face paralyzed or unable to move. And so it gives them an odd appearance, and it makes people distrust them because that's what people did when they came across people with partial deformities. So one thing I mentioned, apox versus vpox, and how, don't get too carried away. And I bring this up because the next thing we're talking about is the grip. So the grip today, if you hear, it's not used that much today, but in more modern times, it was specifically means influenza. And it can actually, we got Spanish flu and we got modern other flus, so it can refer to a specific type of influenza, but it's generally influenza. It comes from a French word, which means to seize or to grab. And you think about it, and it's like, well, why would we use this word? That doesn't really describe influenza, unless you're saying maybe the guy was seized by a demon or something, because people believed in demons at the time. Or it is possible that grip was a more generic term in the past, and it's only in modern times that we use it to refer to influenza specifically. And I have no real proof of this, but again, role-playing games, you're allowed to make things up if you want, so The idea of having different types of grip and, oh, he's got the goblin grip or whatever. Why not? It works well. And basically any disease which has flu-like symptoms, achiness, nausea, headaches, fatigue, can be called a grip. And just, make up a specific type of grip and let your players have fun with it. Now the croup sounds like the grip, but it's not. It comes from not an old English word, an old modern English word. It first became commonly used in 1765 when a doctor named Francis Holmes used it. He was writing about a disease that was going around Edinburgh at the time, which, and so it's from an old modern English word, which is reference to a rasping cough, and so basically a croup. Again, it became common more recently and was referring to a more specific disease. But again, it sounds old-timey, so going back in time and saying, yes, we will use this for our Dungeons & Dragons campaign and just refer to something as a croup, you can do it. You can get away with it. And so basically it's a disease of the upper respiratory tract and the throat. So trouble breathing, scratchy throat. So croup, I got into a little of the meaning of it. It comes from a word, it's basically a hoarse cry. So, that was a croup. And like I said, Francis Holmes referred to it in his book, and so it became associated with this disease that was going around. Consumption. So consumption, again, modern days, consumption refers specifically to tuberculosis. It's basically any kind of disease where someone just sort of wastes away, they lose weight, they, for reasons unknown, reasons known now, but at the time, people didn't, when the term was used in the past, it wasn't known as well. It was used as far back as the 14th century, and it referred to almost any wasting disease back then. So now, if you mention the consumption today, people will think in terms of tuberculosis, but older writings, it could refer to any disease where someone's becoming malnourished and just losing weight for no apparent reason. And as that is a wasting degree, so while it might be called consumption, it might also be called a wasting, or he's got the bugbear wasting or whatever. And so that's just two different names for the same disease, would be wasting or consumption. And again, like I said, modern day consumption has a more specific meaning, but if we want to go back in time and put it in an old setting, then we can use it for anything with the same generic description or the same generic symptoms. A more recent thing, 18th century, the horrors. And the horrors were just it was used for multiple things. So for one thing, anything that basically looked like you were scared. So a fever, if you had trembling, or it would, some people back in the 1800s might say, he has the horrors. Depression, sadness, listlessness was also considered the horror. So fevers and or dementia are sort of a modern day look at what is considered the horrors. And it can be a combination of the two, it can be one or the other. And it was just sort of a generic, it was more of it was considered a disease, or they were considered a disease. It was more of a class of diseases, or just sort of a lump grouping of diseases. Again, this was more the 1800s than older times, but if you want to, use it as a description as opposed to a disease, it works. That's, like I said, it is a better description than disease itself. Similar, consider the night terrors. Someone wakes up in the middle of the night screaming, or talks in their sleep, and they're obviously having a nightmare or something. Not really a disease of itself, but it's a good symptom to give out to something. Last thing I nearly forgot about is the ague. Ague. I looked it up. It is pronounced ague. I used to think it was ague. And that's just, this can be both a disease or it can be just a symptom of a disease. It's basically chills and fever. So malaria at one time was referred to as an ague. Even though it wasn't the ague, it was an ague. And then there are other times when it will be used just as a symptom. Or he's got sores and the ague. And it's not a disease you're talking about, it's symptoms, and then you're going to put those together and try to figure out what it is. So again, your characters, the non-player characters, as they're describing things, they can use ague as either a disease or as a symptom. And that's sort of my intent on talking about this stuff, is it gives game masters some references they can just pop out, and maybe their players will be able to guess what they're talking about. Maybe they'll have to work at it a little more. It can just make things a little more fun rather than just using the name of the disease that's in the book, because yes, there are rules to the game, and rules make things work better for everyone. Sometimes just stepping outside the rule, you're not breaking the rules when you use a different name for something. I mean, you're eventually going to give the player the correct name. You're just giving them something to work with, a little extra flavor to the role play. And the game, a lot of role playing games, people look at them as collaborative storytelling. So by stepping outside of the books or the rules named for diseases and giving them a little extra flavor, you're helping with the storytelling. So I just thought I'd talk about this, give some people some ideas to use in their games, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope some people can use it. Have a good evening.